Well, hey, everybody, we're so glad to have you here today on the podcast. And I'm thrilled to have one of my friends, and I would call someone I've looked up to for longer than he knows it, Dan Reiland. Dan, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate you making some time.
William, I always love time with you, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I don't know if I've told you this story. I may have, but years and years ago, when I was a young pastor in the Presbyterian Church and didn't know anything about leadership development and still learning, right? But knew nothing about it. There were three or four of us that were young pastors, and I think that might have been the only three or four in the denomination that were actually young pastors. And we got together and we bought this series called Joshua's Men or something like that, and it was by this
Yes,
guy Dan Ryland. I mean, that was a while back.
that's a while back.
And that was my introduction to Dan, but a lot of our listeners may not know you. So give us an introduction to you and your story and kind of where you are right now.
I'd love to. Thank you, William, for that invite. So I don't know. I'm probably one of the very few native Southern Californians, born and raised in San Diego, and graduated from San Diego State University with a degree in criminal justice administration. And
That's perfect for pastoral ministry.
exactly, the criminal mind. Understanding the criminal mind helps us a great deal, but didn't really want to, do the pre-law, police, parole, probation, and ended up as a private investigator for a little while. God called me to ministry, jumped over to seminary in Kentucky there at Asbury. And upon graduating, I returned to San Diego and was John Maxwell's very first resident. He just got there, first intern. And it turned out I was his first and last intern. So that's my claim to fame, William. I broke John Maxwell's internship. He said, you know what? We're not doing that anymore. We're closing that. I was apparently so bad, I broke the internship. And now there's redemption in the story, because he also, at that moment, asked me to stay on with him, and that launched a 20-year career together. And of course, today we're very good friends. But we actually came out from San Diego with Enjoy and Ministries. You remember that, and Joshua's
Yes.
Men, and all those kits, and traveling around the country helping churches. And I was at North Point for those years with Andy Stanley, not on staff, but an elder on the board. And then God called me here to 12 Stone with Kevin Myers, the founding pastor of 33 years now. And William, I've been here for 19 years. Can you believe it?
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
there you are.
And arguably one of the prettiest entrances I've been to in a church, where you walk across that bridge through the woods and you're just like, this feels like home. It's amazing.
Across the bridge, yep, and the Starbucks. Of course, nothing's open with COVID, but I
Right.
agree.
Well, that was kind of where I was, not to use an overused word, but headed to pivot, was. So tell us how you're doing with the pandemic. We're recording this in like mid-September. So how are things? And I mean, the news changes every day, but what are you learning, and how's the church doing?
Yeah, it does change constantly, particularly with the school systems. We're in Gwinnett County here, northeast, of the airport. And it's a constant change. And of course, the attendance or the opening and closing of campuses is quite dependent upon, we do upon school systems, because it's very difficult, to make sure the children are safe. So we really work hard with that. But our team is doing great. We're doing great. We're doing great because the team is amazing. I think COVID keeps throwing us curveballs, but the staff of the congregation just keeps swinging. I'll give you just one story of why I call the staff so amazing. Way back when it started, we shut down mid-March, somewhere in March, April. We decided, we're not connected anymore. We're going to call the congregation. Well, first of all, you got to figure out call who. I mean, you have this huge database, right? And you have to figure out who do you call, how many households, all that. And so when they did all the data and figured it out, I don't know how they did, maybe if you had if your kids checked in the last 3 months or something, but the team made, William, I'm so proud of it. The team made 17,000 phone calls.
Wow.
To the core of what they felt were called 12 Stone Home.
Wow.
About 85 of the staff spent 10 days doing it. It was, now some of them were texts and stuff, but it was such a rich experience. they're just an amazing team. But, when you talked about, has the book's role changed? We're talking about what's different about confidence and all that kind of a thing. I think the need for confidence has actually been elevated by COVID.
Well, the ability to have certainty has gone down.
Correct.
And I think I have many times equated certainty with confidence, but I don't know that they are actually synonyms.
Yeah, they really aren't. They ride in tandem, but they're not. And I tell you what I really think is hitting leaders hard. I'm calling it the kind of the UNS syndrome, UNS, the UNS syndrome. And that is unanswered questions, unsolved problems, and unknown future. Those three: unanswered questions, unanswered questions, unsolved problems, and unknown future. I think that's the new overwhelm. I think that's the new overload. Kind of like in music. Music wants a resolve. It wants to come around and land someplace. Your ears hear it, your heart hears it, it wants to land. And right now, nothing's resolving. Nothing wraps around, nothing ends, nothing solves, nothing fixes, there's no, like you said, certainty. And I think that's exhausting to leaders. It's discouraging many leaders. And I think that's why the team we're on, so I'm kind of bragging on the team here, I think that's why the team we're on makes so much difference.
Wow. Well, it's interesting. I'm a one-year Bible guy, right? So every year for forever, and we're headed into Isaiah right now. So we're headed into the kind of the dark season. And I've thought quite a bit, what is it? We complain about 6 months of living in uncertainty. What is it like for God to not speak for 400 years? I mean,
that's great perspective, right?
For 400 years waiting on Jesus to be born. And I'm like, wow, okay, I don't really have it as bad as I think I do. And maybe I'm just in too close a proximity to my friend Joel over at Lakewood, but maybe I'm just being a little too positive. But I think sometimes I get down on our situation and I forget it. This is how many times in the Old Testament were people called to faithfulness when there was no fruit for the seed sown? None at all.
None at all. And I think we know since the church growth movement in the late 70s, early 80s, we've become so accustomed to every 7 days, what's on the scoreboard. Every 7 days, what's on the scoreboard. And there's nothing wrong with that. We want to reach more people for Jesus. But when all of a sudden you turn the lights off on the scoreboard and you don't even, no one knows anymore, that really gets to us. That gets to leaders. Yeah.
Gets to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me dive into the book a little bit. It's called Confident Leader. And a question I always love to ask authors, because I've written a few books, not as many as you, and it's a labor. I mean, I've got 7 kids. I'm yet to give birth, but I think I have a metaphor, a non-physical. I'm not trying to say, I know ladies who are listening, I don't know what you've been through, but it's a labor. And if I didn't have a burden inside me to write, it wouldn't get out. So was there a burden inside you that made you say, I need to get this message out? And what was it? What was the thing God was pushing you to say, Dan, this has got to be said?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a burden, 53,000 words later, and anybody, we can all do 52,000 words. It's putting the right words in the right order. That's the challenge. But honestly, in a thought or two, confidence, I mean, let me give this context. I'm a pastor, you know that, but I'm a pastor who loves to coach spiritual leaders. And it's probably because I've been so blessed by so many mentors, including John Maxwell and others. They poured so much in. It's just my passion to pour it back out. But here's what I've seen over many, many, many years. That confidence for most leaders, for many leaders at least, but I think most leaders, is more situational than internal. It's based more on success and failure, than who you are and what you believe. In other words, let me make it practical. Things like attendance or conflict or how your offerings, or if people disagreeing with you, somebody mad at you, how'd your last sermon go? And that produces kind of a roller coaster effect of ups and downs and highs and lows and fasts and slows. And as a coach, what I know is, because I see it, I experience it, I watch it, is that leaders can have a much more authentic and consistent established confidence within them. And there's a way to do it. There's a way to experience that. It's not easy, but you can have that rather than those highs and lows depending on external circumstances.
Well, I think that's what everybody's looking for. It's that non-anxious presence.
Yep.
That just tells everybody, there's a quarterback in the pocket. It's okay. And that's coming from a Houston Texans fan where we've really not had a quarterback in the pocket until the last couple of years. So, hey, as you think about confident leader,
Yeah.
A question came to mind. I'm wondering, confidence, I think, can be misread as a bad thing. Like I've got a business friend who's not regular in church. I'm trying to get him there, but he's not. And he said to me one time on the golf course, William, I don't know that cockiness is bad if you can back it up. And he was basically endorsing arrogance.
Yeah.
And so, the base of Mount Purgatory is pride, is the chief sin that so many of us fall into. What's the difference between being confident as a leader and being arrogant? And how do you know when you're slipping into the bad side of confidence? I mean, can you help me understand the difference between the two and maybe some warning signs? Because my very favorite Ted Turner quote, I don't know if I've told you this, Dan, and you're in Atlanta, so Ted Turner quotes are all over.
Yep.
But he said one time, if I had a little more humility, I'd be perfect.
That's classic. I was, he's got the Ted's, Montana grills up here. And one time he actually walked through and the whole room kind of hushed as he walked through, but that was quite a few years back, obviously. But yeah, it's a great question, and toss out some thoughts your way and we can bounce them off of each other and learn from each other here. But I think the first thing, let's start with the difference between overconfidence and maybe underconfidence and kind of unpack it a little bit. I think overconfidence is the result of estimating your abilities greater than they really are. Let's just start there. You're estimating your abilities greater than they really are. It lacks self-awareness. Underconfident is more a result of believing less in your abilities than God does. And it looks like you're swayed. It feels this way. You're swayed by the opinions of others. You're over-influenced. You second-guess yourself, fears and insecurities. But here's where it gets interesting. That's kind of intuitive, what I just said, but here's where it gets interesting. We tend to think, and you were hinting at this, we tend to think that overconfidence is better between the two. Like if I'm sitting in a room of leaders or a one-on-one, and we start talking about, well, do you tend toward overconfidence or lacking confidence? They'll raise their hands much quicker to, well, I'm pretty confident. I'm a pretty confident leader. But they're equally a problem because where overconfidence leads to arrogance, underconfidence leads to avoidance. And one causes you to think too much of yourself and push forward and push over people. Those are the warning signs. You're starting to go do what you think, what you want, when you want, the way you want it. And ultimately it starts to serve you. And of course, those are some of the danger signs. Underconfidence is you pull back, you second guess, you avoid. It's the opposite. And authentic confidence is seeing yourself the way God sees you, right? And you're relying on his presence and power combined with you have a genuine, authentic appreciation and development of your gifts and abilities. Now, here's the unique thing. I'll land it here, at least for these thoughts. We're all often striving for this thing like humble confidence, right? And how do you do that? And I really think it's no more complicated than admitting your flaws and your faults. When you admit your flaws and your faults, just admit your stuff, right? Just own it, not excuse it. It makes you human, and it lets you be real. It lets you be self-aware, which is one of the most important first steps to building confidence, just being the real you. Anyways, that's a stab at your question. I hope that makes sense.
No, it does. And I have had a lifelong battle with pride, and sometimes I come out on the good side of that and sometimes not. I'm trying to learn the warning signs, but I think the key you're talking about, this self-awareness. Self-awareness begins with seeing yourself how Jesus sees you, right?
Right, right.
And we've done well north of 20,000 interviews of pastors here now. And if you ask people on a team, what's the rarest gift you'll see in people you interview, it's self-awareness. I mean,
Yeah.
I think if people could focus on that one gift, like being honestly self-aware, yeah, go a long way. That's a great answer, Dan. So I was reading through your book, and I noticed this chapter on focus, right? And I remembered growing up watching football. I grew up right when Joe Montana, the catch and all that, and you're a Californian, so you remember this. But then George Seifert followed Bill Walsh. And I think it was Seifert that was kind of famous for scripting the first 15 plays of the game, and he'd never deviate from the first 15 plays he'd scripted for the game. And everybody looked up to him, and
Yeah.
oh, what a great thing. And I thought, this is what Dan's talking about, focus. And then I thought about COVID and how do you script anything? So, like, on the one hand, everybody wants a leader who can pivot, but there's a difference between pivot and just being ADD and focus and being rigid and unable to do anything. So talk to me about focus in an age where the headlines change every 2 minutes.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And you are right, William. We can't know the game plan with any great certainty. I mean, things change so fast. It's interesting you picked this chapter. I think it's one of John Maxwell's. He was very kind to write the foreword to the book. And he loves this chapter. He loves one quote in it where I wrote something to the effect of, you can't chase two rabbits and think you're going to catch one. If you chase two rabbits, you're going to catch neither one. And he's off and running, and he's got a new phrase he loves to say, which is pick a rabbit. Guys, pick a rabbit, because you gotta pick it and go. And so the focus thing is really difficult, but we're in this season where I feel like I'm chasing rabbits all over the place. It's like there's 17 of them and they're all running and
they multiply.
And they're multiplying, and I want to tell myself, pick a rabbit, and I can't, and leaders, So, but I do think there's two things that help us. One is direct, and that doesn't make this reality go away. And I don't think it's going to go away fast. It's getting a little better, but it's not going away fast. I think two things help us, William. One is direction, and the other is measurement. And I think what helps us stay on track, even though it's all squirrely, is if you stick to your vision, if the vision's clear, the values are clear, and the culture's clear. Kind of like the guardrails, the banks of a river. You know where you're going, the vision's set, you know your values, you know who you are, you know the culture. And I'm going to steal something from one of your books that we've used more than you know. If you're most true to who you really are, your staff is, you're most true to who you are at your best. We got that from your book, Culture Wins. What we're doing, William, I don't even know if I've told you this, but we're rewriting, we're not rewriting our culture, values, and attributes, but we're refreshing them. They've needed a refreshing. And we've used that phrase in your book, who are you, who are we when we're at our best? It's a brilliant thought, because we don't want to write something aspirational and put it up on the wall. We want to write down who we really are and then stick to it. But I think that's number one. Direction is your vision, values, and culture. Those are the guardrails. Then the second one is measurement. I think every church needs a new way or a freshened or elevated way to keep score. We are wired. Leaders, we're type A, generally speaking, driven. We want to press forward. Even if we're not type A, we want to make progress. And you got to measure it. You got to be honest about it. Are we just running in circles and chasing rabbits? Or are we going somewhere? I was recently asked, Dan, somebody said to me, Dan, so what's your attendance at 12 Stone right now? And I looked at him, this is a couple of months ago now. And I paused, I was caught off guard, and I said, I don't know. I don't know. First time in 39 years, I don't know. And I'm still stunned by that. Now it's getting a little bit better. We're all starting to open our doors and that kind of a thing. But I think we have to go to a different scorekeeping for a while. Stories of life change, stories of salvations and baptism, stories of engagement. And William, you would say as a leader in the church, well, that's not really new. No, but the emphasis is new.
That's right.
The emphasis, where before it was like attendance, yay, and that's good. We want to reach more people for Jesus, of course. But now it's more engagement. Remember
That's
how
right.
we all watched in March and April, we watched the attendance skyrocket when we went online.
Mm-hmm.
And then across the country, it dropped as quickly because people were saying, I love the church. You're doing a good job, but staring at my laptop and pouring syrup on my kids' pancakes and looking at my email isn't really working for me anymore, And so engagement, we're trying to figure out how to engage people again. But anyways, those two things, the direction and the measurement, that lets you be adaptable and agile in a way that, and we'll go all the way back to where you started, in a way that doesn't seem wishy-washy. You may be zigging and zagging, but when you're true to your direction and you're true to your measurement, that allows us to stay to a game plan the best we possibly can.
This is such a good answer. That's so good. And I think you're right about what the scoreboard looks like. Years and years ago, when I was a young senior pastor, moved here to Houston, Ed Young, the father, Ed the elder, I guess.
And the elder, yeah.
He and I became friends. He was the first pastor to call me when I moved to town. It was really great. But in one of the many lunches we had, he said, William, did you know the church is a nonprofit, but it has a profit margin? I said, no. He said, the profit margin of the church is life change. You show that to the stockholders and they'll never quit investing in your church.
That's so good. That's so good.
Yeah, he's pretty smart.
He's a smart guy.
He's a smart guy.
Yep.
Yeah. Hey, so confidence, part of my confidence comes from realizing where I've slipped before and not wanting to slip again. You touch a hot stove and you don't do it again.
Right. Yeah.
You learn from your failures. I took a handgun defense class a couple weeks ago, and we were using simunition, which is a plastic bullet. And it'll hurt you bad if you get shot. And you had to stop a gunman coming at you. And he said, too many of you passed. I wish you'd have failed. And we were like, why? And he said, because if you get shot, you won't make the same mistake again. So I'm always asking leaders, like, tell me where have you learned from a time that you didn't have confidence or you slipped, and what lesson has that helped you apply going forward?
Yes. Well, the good news there, I tend to make a lot of mistakes and slip and fail a lot. I think when we're pushing forward and driving forward, that's just kind of in the game. But an older story comes to mind, because you're great friends with John Maxwell too, and so I want to reach back and tell one from Skyline in San Diego, because it was, and I'm going to tell you why. It's a marking story as a very, very young leader. So a long time ago, San Diego, for listeners, Skyline Church, John Maxwell was the senior pastor there. And it was the church's first capital stewardship campaign, back when we still used to say that, capital stewardship campaign, right? We don't even say that. Now they're generosity something, right? But back then, and I didn't know what it was. The church didn't know it. It was like the mid 80s or something, right? And we had just announced this big launch, and I was confident, I was excited. And nobody knew really what it meant, but the congregation did know it meant fundraising. They did know that, but they didn't know how it worked. And John was scheduled to travel out of the country right after that announcement, and he'd be back, and we'd start all the mechanics of it. Well, we quickly figured out that the congregation panicked. They freaked out. They didn't know. They somehow, I promise, we don't know how, but it went like wildfire through the ranks, that they thought we were going to come knocking on the doors and telling them each one how much they had to give. And they really thought that. And it got heated, it got tense, it got wild. And I was a young leader. I lost my confidence. I flat out panicked. I just panicked because John's gone, right? And I'm okay. I'm like, now it's me. What, And so he was in Japan, and I thought, I'm not going to call him. I called him. Because I was like, I don't know what to do. I called. It's like, John, you got to get home. Come home, help. And he came back, and he stood up before the congregation with a with a sure, easy, calming, that voice, calming voice. And he said, "Church, I've heard, and I want to tell you something. Everything's going to be okay." And you could just, each service, you could feel like they all breathed, and they just thought, he didn't say the solution. He didn't tell them anything. He just said, "It's all going to be okay." It was like Dad came home and everything was well, or soon would be. And I learned in that moment, William, that confidence is more about who you are than what you do. Confidence is more than your skill set. Skills are highly related, of course, but it comes from the inside. And I've never forgotten that. It comes from a belief in self and a knowledge that God is with me. That self-awareness then comes from that. And then it's your skills. But when I watched that happen, and by the way, of course, I love John and so grateful for him. But when he saw me, when he got back from the airport, see, he's just as real behind the scenes as he is on the platform. And when he saw me, and I'm like, John, what are we going to do? And he said, "Dano, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay." It was just in him. And that was the first time I began to understand confidence, when I saw confidence in a leader who was under fire and he knew it.
That's so good. And it didn't have anything to do with knowing the solution path.
No, they didn't know what was coming. They didn't know how it was going to go. It was just like and you know what I think it really was? They trusted him. It was a trust relationship.
Wow.
That was extended, which was part of that situation. Because a leader can be confident, but if the people don't trust you, it doesn't matter.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And I think, if you're going to try and find a leader who is 100% trustworthy all the time, good luck. Because
correct. We make mistakes.
I fail every day. I think where I'm seeing leaders really excel in confidence is the ones who are, well, like our mutual friend, Kevin Queen, who just leans so heavily into his time with Jesus and uses that as his vocabulary.
Yep.
And people are like, well, if he's near that guy, we're going to be okay.
We're going to be okay.
It's the, what was the old, the Heidelberg Catechism? What is your only hope in life and in death? My only sure and certain hope in life and in death is that Jesus Christ, at the cost of his own blood, and then it goes on and on and on. And it's like, if you can stay close to that certainty and that hope, then I think your people are going to be okay with not knowing the mechanics of how we're going to get through.
How we're going to get through it, correct.
That's good.
I think now in this, of course, in crisis, the good news for those who are listening in is crisis never lasts forever. We're going to get through this.
That's right.
We are going to get through this. Now, it's not necessarily easy, but we are going to get through it. And second, the congregations we serve, they are not expecting the answer or an answer.
No.
What they want and what they need is the next step.
That's right.
Each of us need to just present the next step, not necessarily, quote, the answer.
That's right. And I've heard somebody said it to me when look, if you guys aren't meeting back in March, you're not hiring anybody. If you're not hiring anybody, you're not hiring me. So there's been more than a few sleepless nights during the beginning of this. And I was trying to figure out the path. And a pastor said to me, it dawned on me that unless you were alive 100 years ago, none of us know what to do. So
Exactly.
It's like, oh, that's kind of liberating. Okay, well, now let's think differently. So, yeah. Well, Dan, I do fall prey to being the guy that all I have is a hammer, so everything looks like a nail. And my hammer that I have is succession. That's the big burden that I have for the church for the next 10, 15 years. And you've seen this happen a lot, and you're smart. You're building leadership pipelines, and I'm building my succession, and I'm hoping I got a long time left. Tell us what you're doing as you think through your own personal succession.
Sure. I'm going to back this up 5, 6 years or 7 years. Well, I don't know. Maybe I'll call it 5 or 6 years. I don't write all this stuff down, but it's been a while now. We were sitting in a room on the executive team here at 12 Stone, and I think pretty much everybody was in their 40s in that room. And we just kind of looked around the room in that moment and said, we just do not want to be a church where everybody in this room is in their 50s, and then everybody in this room is in their 60s. And we're going to blink, and we're going to be that.
That's good.
And so we determined then we're going to start raising up some of these young, incredibly sharp leaders and giving them real responsibility, bringing them to the table, giving them decision-making responsibility. And so we've actually been doing that, not flawlessly, not perfectly, but we've been doing it and raising up several young leaders who now have tremendous responsibility, and they are decision makers. And I've had 2 or 3 that under my care and leadership, and not solely, of course. Kevin Myers is a brilliant leader and pouring into them as well. But for example, we have just recently named, after a couple of years now, we've just recently named another Dan Vanderwall, as the new XP at 12 Stone, and I'm more chief of staff. And he's brilliant, he's fast, he's full of energy, and he's fully empowered. And yet one of the things that we love is the more we it's the relationship. The more we let go, the more we empower, the more the more they have the baton, the more they come back and ask questions. Because I'm not the future, but we can provide things to help them go farther and faster. And they appreciate that. We talk all the time. And so that's the succession idea. And I think it's most powerful. I didn't say it very eloquently there, but it's most powerful when it's a relationship that goes both ways.
Yes.
Where we acknowledge the young and the future and the talent and the creativity and the relevance, and they acknowledge the, if you'll allow me to say, wisdom or experience, or we can help them not step on landmines, kind of a thing. And we're having a time of our lives doing that.
Wow. I heard Grishel give a talk years and years ago about the two-way street there. And it's those in the younger generation, if you can respect those above, and those in the older generation, if you can trust those below, that's the two-way street.
That's good.
Yeah, well, he's kind of smart.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Yep.
Well, listen, those of you all listening today, the book is Confident Leader. And I don't know if I'm the only one on the podcast who had a few sleepless nights where you're like, I don't know what I'm going to do. But I wish I'd have had this book back in March. And if you're still sitting there saying, it looks like we might be in this for a while, and you want to, move past just the cookie cutter to a place where you've got more authentic confidence, highly, highly recommend Dan's book, Confident Leader. We're going to send out links to all kinds of things in the show notes. And if you aren't on that list, just go to vandercast.com, enter your email address. We won't beat you up with a bunch of emails. We'll just send you show notes and what's coming up next. And Dan, golly, thanks for making time. I mean, I don't know, pastors are working harder than ever, and you're taking time out to invest in us and this, and I just really appreciate it.
My pleasure, William. Thank you for the invite. I appreciate you and your friendship. I've enjoyed working with you in your company. And by the way, you really have earned those accolades of one of the best teams in the country. I've been in your shop, I've been in your place, I've been around your gang, and they're phenomenal. Yeah. So, and that's a tribute. I know they're wonderful, sharp people, but that's a tribute to you too. So good job.
Well, I'm trying to learn from them as I go. So thanks very much. Hey, thank you all for listening, and we'll look forward to talking to you again very soon.